All right, let's get right into it. Have you ever felt like the rules in your homeowners association were, well, a little confusing? Today, we're diving into the story of one homeowner who took on his condo association over a single election, all because of what seemed like a tiny detail on the ballots. And this one case really gets to the heart of a question that affects millions of us living in HOAs.
So, this is the big question. This is what the whole thing boils down to. The case, Gounder versus the Royal Riviera Condominium Association. It all hangs on this one single point. And believe me, the final answer ended up setting a huge precedent.
Okay, so here's the core of the problem. Picture this. It's March 14th, 2016. The HOA is holding its board election. If you voted by mail, you got the ballot on the left, 6 names plus a little slot for a write-in. Simple enough. But if you showed up to the meeting in person, you got the ballot on the right. And look at that. A 7th candidate's name just appears and poof, the write-in option is gone. 2 different ballots for the same election.
And that difference right there is what sparked the formal legal challenge. The petitioner, a homeowner named Paul Gounder, saw this and said, wait a minute. He alleged that using 2 fundamentally different ballots was a straight-up violation of Arizona state law.
Gounder's argument was actually really simple but powerful. He basically said these ballots weren't just different, they were unequal. Think about it. By adding that 7th name, Eric Thompson, only to the meeting ballot, the HOA gave voters who were physically there an option that absentee voters never even knew existed. How can you vote for a candidate you don't even know is on the ballot?
So how did the association respond? Well, they pushed back hard. Their defense came down to 2 main ideas. First, they claimed, hey, this is common practice. A lot of HOAs do this. And second, they argued that no law on the books explicitly says the ballots have to be identical. They also kind of threw in that a whole new election had already happened a year later, so the whole thing was basically irrelevant, or moot.
And this is where the story takes its first real twist. You'd think the homeowner has a pretty clear-cut case, right? Well, the first judge to hear it actually sided with the HOA. The case was dismissed.
Yeah, so on October 18th, 2016, Judge Diana Mahalski ruled that no specific rule was actually broken. Her logic was, and you can see it in her words here, that no law by its plain language stops an HOA from adding names at the meeting. So in other words, her thinking was, if a law doesn't specifically say you can't do it, then it must be okay.
And for Paul Gounder, this really felt like the end of the line. The first ruling basically said that this kind of procedural mess, even if it feels totally unfair, was perfectly legal. It looked like the case was closed.
But it wasn't the end. The story wasn't over. The case was about to get a second wind, a whole new chance for review that would completely flip the script.
Let's just take a quick look at the timeline here. This whole legal battle stretched out for over a year. You see the election in March, the dismissal in October, but then that critical moment in February 2017. The petitioner asked for a rehearing, and in a huge development, the Arizona Department of Real Estate granted it. The fight was officially back on.
And this wasn't just some general, let's look at this again. Nope, the department asked for a review focused on one very specific piece of the law, Arizona Revised Statute Section 33-1250. That's the part that lays out all the voting rules for condos. The focus was now laser sharp.
All right, so this brings us to the main event, the climax of the whole story. We have a new judge, a super specific legal question to answer, and now the final binding decision was about to come down. The entire case hinged on this one little section of Arizona law. It says a ballot has to provide an opportunity to vote for or against each proposed action. Let's call it the equal vote rule to keep it simple. And those last few words, each proposed action, man, they turned out to be everything. And here it is, the final word. The new judge, Suzanne Marwell, had a totally different take. Her logic was that electing Mr. Thompson was a proposed action. And since that action only showed up on the meeting ballot, every single person who voted by mail was, in her words, denied their right to vote. It was a clear violation of that equal vote rule.
Now, what's really important here is the nuance in this ruling. The judge didn't say that mail-in and meeting ballots have to be 100% identical photocopies. The crucial point, the big takeaway, is that any substantive change, like adding a whole new candidate, has to be sent out to all members. Everyone has to have an equal shot.
Just as a little side note, the judge did look at another part of the law, one that deals with when ballots have to be mailed out and delivered.
She found the HOA actually did follow those rules for the original mail-in ballot. So the problem wasn't the first ballot itself, it was creating that second unequal ballot at the meeting.
And here's the proof in the pudding. The official final order, signed, sealed, and delivered on June 12, 2017. This is the document that made the judge's decision the law of the land and set a really powerful new precedent for HOAs all over the state.
Okay, so what does one case about one condo election in one state really mean for you? Well, it turns out this ruling has some pretty big implications for anyone living in a community with an HOA.
So let's just break down the big takeaways. First and foremost, you have the right to vote on every single substantive issue, not just the ones on the first draft of the ballot. Second, if your board wants to make a big change, like adding a candidate, they have to tell everybody. And third, and this is a big one, the excuse "but we've always done it this way" is not a defense in court. The bottom line is, this case proved that the fairness of your HOA election is actually protected by law.
And this wasn't just a symbolic victory either. There were real consequences. The final order demanded that the association pay back the petitioner's $500 filing fee. That's a direct financial penalty for breaking the rules.
You know, this entire thing started because one person noticed a small difference and knew it wasn't right. It really leaves us with a pretty important question to think about. How well do you really know your own community's election rules? And more importantly, are they being followed fairly for everyone?